Kamala Harris, dressed in a simple yet elegant suit, stepped into the private jet cabin with a faint smile on her lips. After weeks of back-to-back meetings and political engagements, she had been eagerly anticipating this trip. The destination was the Maldives, a tropical paradise where she hoped to relax and recharge. The jet's luxurious interior featured plush leather seats, soft ambient lighting, and meticulously arranged amenities, exuding the charm of a five-star hotel in motion. Kamala placed her bag in the overhead compartment, sank into her seat, and savored a rare moment free from political pressures. A flight attendant with neatly tied blonde hair, Emily, entered the cabin, greeting passengers warmly. However, when her gaze landed on Kamala, her smile wavered, replaced by a harder-to-read expression. Kamala, with her sharp instincts, noticed the subtle shift immediately. She returned a gentle smile and nodded politely, though she couldn't help but wonder what had prompted the change in demeanor. Emily glanced at the passenger list in her hand, her eyes lingering on Kamala's name. She then turned abruptly and walked quickly toward the service galley, where another flight attendant awaited her. Deciding not to dwell on the incident, Kamala slipped off her shoes, reclined in her seat, and pulled out a book she had been reading. Before she could turn the first page, she felt a gaze from across the aisle. A young woman, likely in her early 30s with long black hair, was watching her with a curious yet amicable expression. Kamala smiled, and the woman responded with a small nod before quietly opening her laptop and immersing herself in work. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Emily returned to the cabin but avoided looking Kamala's way, focusing on attending to other passengers. Kamala observed how Emily interacted kindly and attentively with everyone else, but when she approached Kamala, she placed a glass of water on the tray with a noticeable clink and said nothing. Kamala raised an eyebrow but maintained her composure, smiling graciously. "Thank you, that's very thoughtful," she said. Emily responded with a strange smile and quickly retreated. Something felt off. Kamala had faced hostility before, but this felt different, deliberate. An hour into the flight, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Across the aisle, the young woman from earlier stood and approached Kamala. "I'm Sarah," she whispered. "I couldn't help but notice that flight attendant doesn't seem to like you." Kamala offered a polite but cautious smile. "She's just doing her job." Sarah glanced around the cabin, ensuring no one else was listening. "I overheard her talking about you with another attendant near the galley. It worried me." Kamala's smile remained, but her eyes darkened slightly. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll keep that in mind." Sarah returned to her seat as Kamala leaned back, her mind racing. Emily's behavior wasn't just a fleeting annoyance, it seemed purposeful. When Kamala glanced toward the galley, she caught Emily's fleeting gaze. It carried a coldness she couldn't ignore. Silently, Kamala reminded herself to stay calm, everything would eventually come to light. She tried to focus on her book, but the discomfort lingered. Even without looking, she could feel Emily's probing gaze. Emily reappeared, balancing a tray of drinks. She smiled politely as she served passengers ahead of Kamala. "Orange juice or green tea?" she asked sweetly, placing drinks with care. When she reached Kamala, however, her smile faded. Emily placed the drink on Kamala's tray with a sharp clink and a curt tone. "This is your drink," she said. Kamala looked up, her expression composed. "Thank you," she replied, her polite smile not masking the inquisitiveness in her eyes. Emily said nothing, arched a brow, and moved on. Across the aisle, Sarah leaned forward with a disapproving look. "Did you notice her attitude? She's been like that since we boarded." Kamala set her glass down calmly. "Perhaps it's just been a long workday," she replied, though her thoughts suggested otherwise. Though Kamala tried to assure herself with her own words, doubt lingered in her mind. Sarah, seated nearby, shook her head slightly but leaned back, her watchful eyes following Emily. As a human rights lawyer, Sarah was no stranger to spotting injustice, and she couldn't overlook the stark difference in how Emily treated Kamala compared to the other passengers. It wasn't long before Emily returned, this time without her tray. She walked directly to Kamala's seat and stopped abruptly, crossing her arms. "Are you sure you booked this flight properly?" she asked, her tone icy and openly hostile. Her words caught the attention of nearby passengers, who turned their heads toward Kamala, curiosity mixed with discomfort on their faces. Kamala looked up, her demeanor calm as ever. "I booked through my office. My documents were checked and confirmed when I boarded. If you'd like to verify anything further, feel free." Emily raised an eyebrow, dissatisfaction evident on her face. "I just want to make sure everyone on this flight is where they're supposed to be." Kamala placed her book down on the tray table, her gaze sharpening. "If there's something specific you'd like to ask, please do so directly." Emily's lips curled into a faint, mocking smile, but she didn't reply. She turned abruptly, her eyes briefly meeting Sarah's before she disappeared into the galley. Sarah stood up and approached Kamala, speaking in a hushed voice. "Do you need my help? I don't want you to go through this alone." Kamala smiled at her, grateful for the offer. "Thank you, but I'm fine. I'd like to see what they intend to do next." Sarah nodded, but before she returned to her seat, she slipped a small note onto Kamala's tray table. Kamala unfolded it to read a simple but urgent message: "Be careful. I think she's up to something." Folding the note back into her palm, Kamala quietly reflected on how subtle hostility had escalated into outright confrontation. But why? Was it because of her identity, or was there a deeper reason behind Emily's behavior? From the galley, Kamala could hear muffled whispers between Emily and another flight attendant. Though she couldn't make out the entire conversation, fragments like "not safe," "do something," and "report" stood out. Kamala tilted her head slightly, her expression remaining neutral. Across the aisle, Sarah leaned toward her. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "I think they're targeting you." Kamala nodded faintly. "I did. But let's let them continue. Truth has a way of revealing itself." Sarah fell silent, but her tense posture betrayed her readiness to intervene if necessary. Emily soon returned, her demeanor more serious. She stopped near Kamala's seat, holding a passenger manifest in her hand. "Can I see your booking documents again? I need to verify that all the information matches." Kamala looked up, her calm gaze cutting through the tension. "I already presented my documents when I boarded. If there's an issue, I suggest you address it with the captain or a flight supervisor, not me." Emily hesitated, momentarily thrown off by Kamala's steady composure. "We just want to ensure everyone on board is where they're supposed to be. Safety is our top priority." Kamala's expression didn't waver. "I assure you, I pose no threat to the safety of this flight." Emily offered no response, turning on her heel and leaving behind a charged silence. The cabin grew heavier as passengers exchanged uneasy glances but remained quiet. Sarah leaned toward Kamala again. "Something's not right. You need to be cautious." Kamala nodded, saying nothing. She placed her book on her lap and directed her gaze toward the galley door where Emily had disappeared. She knew the ordeal was far from over. As the flight continued, Kamala felt the weight of the cabin's attention pressing down on her. The combined whispers of Sarah's warning and Emily's behavior suggested a larger confrontation brewing. Kamala leaned back in her seat, scanning the ceiling thoughtfully. What should have been a peaceful journey now felt like the prelude to an unexpected battle, one where her opponent remained cloaked in shadow. The glass on her tray table trembled slightly from turbulence, but Kamala's unease wasn't about the plane's technical stability. Emily's increasingly bold behavior wasn't just unprofessional, it carried a deeper, more sinister intent. Kamala was acutely aware of it. Emily reappeared, this time not carrying a tray but a small file folder. She walked purposefully down the aisle, her scrutinizing gaze making no effort to hide its intent. Stopping at Kamala's seat, she stood tall, arms crossed. "Mrs. Harris," Emily began, her voice attempting politeness but laced with unmistakable menace, "I need to see your booking documents again. We need to ensure all." Passengers glanced up, their faces etched with curiosity and unease as Emily's words hung in the air. Sarah, seated nearby, leaned forward slightly, gripping her armrest as though ready to intervene at a moment's notice. Kamala placed her book gently on the tray table and looked up at Emily, her calm expression unwavering, though her eyes carried a sharp edge. "Miss, I provided all the necessary documentation when I boarded. Everything was verified. If you require further confirmation, I can have my office contact the airline directly," Kamala said evenly. Emily smirked, her smile tinged with mockery. "Oh, there's no need for that. This is just a standard procedure to ensure the safety of the flight," she replied, her voice lowering but still loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I'm sure you understand, not everyone belongs everywhere." A ripple of shock passed through the cabin as passengers exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of discomfort and disbelief. Sarah, unable to remain silent, stood abruptly. "Miss," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension. "This is not standard procedure. This is blatant discrimination. Mrs. Harris has done nothing wrong, and I don't believe you have the authority to treat her this way." Emily turned to Sarah, her sharp gaze defiant. "Ma'am, this does not concern you. We're doing this for everyone's safety on board." Sarah didn't waver. "I'm a human rights attorney. I know precisely what rights passengers have. What you're doing not only violates Mrs. Harris's individual rights, but also tarnishes the reputation of this airline." Emily raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable, then turned sharply and strode back toward the galley. Moments later, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, breaking the tense atmosphere. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to technical reasons, we will be making an emergency landing at a nearby airport. Please remain calm and follow the crew's instructions." Kamala lifted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. The timing of this technical reason felt too coincidental, and she couldn't help but suspect it was tied to the escalating situation. Sarah turned to Kamala, her concern evident. Kamala gave her a small nod, silently assuring her she was fine. Emily reappeared from the galley, her demeanor rigid, hostility now completely unmasked. She walked directly to Kamala, her voice cold and authoritative. "Mrs. Harris, I need you to pack your belongings. Upon landing, you will be required to disembark immediately." Her words struck like a blow, plunging the cabin into stunned silence. Passengers gaped, their disbelief palpable. Sarah stood once more, her voice strong and unyielding. "You have no right to force her off this plane without just cause. This is an abuse of power, and I will not stand for it." Emily turned on Sarah, her finger pointing in accusation. "You need to stay quiet. This doesn't concern you." Sarah stepped forward, standing face to face with Emily. "You're wrong. This concerns all of us. Your discriminatory and abusive actions are an insult to every passenger here." The cabin erupted in murmurs as other passengers began whispering among themselves. An older man seated at the front spoke up. "Miss, I think you're overstepping. No one here feels threatened by her." Emily, now visibly cornered, remained silent but stubbornly held her ground. When the plane landed at a small, isolated airport, Kamala was forced to gather her belongings and leave the cabin. Emily stood at the door, her cold gaze trailing Kamala as she disembarked. While no other passengers intervened further, their eyes tracked her every move. On the tarmac, Sarah approached Kamala. "I'll testify for you. This cannot go unchallenged." Kamala smiled, gratitude and determination radiating from her expression. "Thank you. I won't let them get away with this." As Kamala stepped onto the runway, she kept her focus straight ahead, never looking back. Inside, however, a quiet rage simmered. This wasn't just a personal insult, it was a calculated, deliberate attack. She was resolute in uncovering the truth and ensuring accountability. The plane taxied away, its silhouette disappearing into the horizon. Kamala stood alone on the desolate runway, surrounded by stillness. The scorching heat radiating off the asphalt only amplified the isolation and humiliation she felt. Around her, the scene was eerily quiet, no airport staff, no moving vehicles, only a small, distant building resembling an abandoned administrative office. Dragging her suitcase behind her, Kamala walked toward the building. Each step echoed against the empty tarmac, a solitary sound in the vast silence. The structure appeared neglected, its walls cracked and windows clouded with dust. Pushing open the door, Kamala stepped into a dim interior that mirrored the decay outside. Worn-out plastic chairs lined the walls, and a reception desk sat in disrepair. Kamala paused, taking a moment to steady herself. She wasn't just standing in an abandoned office, she was standing at the threshold of a new battle, one she was determined to fight. They think I'll stay silent, she thought, her resolve hardening. They're wrong. The reception area was dim and neglected, cobwebs draped across corners, and scattered papers littering the floor. Kamala's eyes scanned the room, searching for any means of communication. After a few minutes of rummaging, she found an old phone on the reception desk. Lifting the receiver, she held onto a faint hope that it might still work, but all she heard was the static hum of a disconnected line. Disappointed, she placed the receiver back and sat down on one of the plastic chairs, resting her hands on her suitcase and staring blankly ahead. She pulled out her cell phone once again, only to be met with the same unyielding message, no service. Squinting, Kamala wondered if the lack of signal was due to the remoteness of the area or something more deliberate. She checked again, but the result was unchanged. Outside, the sun was setting, its golden light fading into encroaching darkness. Kamala knew she couldn't stay at the abandoned airport much longer. The area seemed unsecured, and nightfall brought uncertainties. Rising to her feet, she grabbed her suitcase and stepped outside, heading toward a narrow path that led away from the airport. The distant shadow of a forest loomed ahead, the trail disappearing into its depths. With no better options, Kamala turned on a flashlight she had found in the abandoned office and began walking. Her footsteps crunched against the dry ground, blending with the faint rustling of the forest. Each gust of wind seemed to whisper through the trees, creating the eerie impression of being watched. She glanced over her shoulder a few times, but saw nothing except the enveloping darkness. Yet, an unsettling feeling clung to her, quickening her heartbeat. After about 20 minutes, Kamala heard a faint sound behind her. It wasn't the wind or the rustling of branches, it was footsteps. She stopped abruptly, turned around, and shone her flashlight into the darkness. Nothing. The trail and bushes flanking its sides were empty, but Kamala's instincts told her she wasn't alone. Forcing herself to remain calm, she resumed walking, her pace slower, her senses hyper-aware of every sound around her. A faint light appeared in the distance, and relief washed over Kamala as she recognized the glow of small houses clustered at the edge of the forest. Approaching cautiously, she began to hear the sounds of life, laughter, children playing, and the soft melodies of folk songs drifting on the breeze. Kamala exhaled deeply and stepped into the village. The villagers, curious but warm, quickly gathered around her. A tall, kind-faced man stepped forward, his voice steady and welcoming. "Ma'am, you look like you've had a tough journey. Is everything all right?" he asked. Kamala managed a faint smile, though exhaustion was evident in her posture. "I was left stranded at the nearby airport. I need to contact my office, but there's no phone service there." The man nodded sympathetically. "The signal here isn't great either, but you're welcome to rest for the night. We'll help you in the morning." Kamala was led to a small house where the villagers offered her food and water. An elderly woman, seemingly the community caregiver, gently treated the minor scratches on Kamala's legs. As Kamala rested, a young girl, about 12 years old, approached her with bright, eager eyes. "You're Kamala Harris, aren't you?" the girl asked, her voice trembling with excitement. "I've seen you on TV. You're amazing. I want to grow up and be just like you." Kamala's tired expression softened, her smile warm as she met the girl's eyes. "Thank you, Asha. But you're already strong. I believe you can achieve anything you set your mind to." Asha grasped Kamala's hand tightly, her eyes shining with determination. "But you're here all alone. Did something bad happen?" Kamala nodded gently. "Yes, Asha, something bad did happen. But I'm okay." I believe that the truth always comes to light, and I won't let anyone get away with wrongdoing. That night, Kamala lay on a simple bed in the modest home, the soft glow of an oil lamp on the table casting comforting shadows. Though her body longed for rest, her mind was restless, replaying the events on the plane, Emily's blatant hostility, and the suspicious emergency landing. Kamala was certain this wasn't a random occurrence, something bigger was at play, and she was determined to uncover it. Outside, the sound of crickets mingled with the gentle rustling of the wind, but the peace was only surface deep. Within Kamala's heart, the battle had already begun. She pressed her lips into a firm line of resolve, whispering to herself, "They think they can humiliate me without consequence. They're wrong." The morning in the small village began serenely, with the sound of roosters crowing, children laughing, and quiet conversations among the villagers. Sunlight streamed through the modest room where Kamala had slept, warming her face and igniting the determination in her eyes. This journey had shifted from personal disruption to a larger mission, a fight against injustice. During breakfast, Jamal, the village chief, approached her with important news. His voice was kind yet purposeful. "We managed to contact an acquaintance in a nearby town," he explained. "They can help you reach a place with phone service. We'll take you there whenever you're ready." Kamala smiled, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she replied. "I'm ready to take the next step." Gratitude gleamed in Kamala's eyes as she turned to Jamal. "Thank you, Jamal. Your kindness is something I will never forget." While waiting for her next steps, Kamala spent time with the villagers. A young girl named Asha hovered nearby, her excitement barely contained. "Are you really Kamala Harris?" Asha asked, her wide eyes brimming with wonder. "I saw you on TV. I want to grow up and be strong like you." Kamala placed a gentle hand on Asha's shoulder, her gaze soft and encouraging. "You're already strong, Asha. You can do anything you set your mind to if you believe in yourself." Asha's fists clenched, her eyes sparkling as though discovering newfound strength within herself. "What will you do next, Kamala?" she asked, her small voice filled with trust. Kamala took a deep breath and looked toward the horizon. "I'm going back home to make things right. No one has the right to treat anyone unfairly." After several hours in an old pickup truck, Kamala reached a small town where she finally found a phone signal. She immediately called her office, and her assistant Kevin answered, his voice heavy with concern. "Kamala, finally. You called. We've been worried sick since yesterday. What happened?" Kamala steadied herself before replying, "I'll explain everything when I'm back, but right now, I need you to prepare for a press conference. This isn't just personal, it's a fight we can't ignore." Hours later, Kamala arrived at a major airport in Washington, where Kevin and her legal team awaited her arrival. The car ride to her office was tense, filled with frustration and resolve. Even Kevin, typically calm and composed, couldn't hide his anger. The airline released a statement. Kevin began, his tone sharp with sarcasm. "They're calling it a routine safety decision by the flight crew." Kamala raised an eyebrow. "Do they think I'll accept that excuse? We have witnesses and evidence. They can't hide forever." Kevin nodded. "I've already contacted Sarah, the passenger who defended you. She's willing to testify, and another passenger recorded the entire incident. The video is going viral on social media." Kamala leaned back, her eyes burning with resolve. "Good. We won't let this fade away. This is our chance to stand up for those who can't." The next day, Kamala held a major press conference outside her office, with reporters from across the country gathered and cameras trained on her. Stepping up to the podium in a dark suit, Kamala exuded confidence, her indignation barely contained. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice firm and clear, "yesterday, I experienced something that no one, absolutely no one, should have to endure. On a flight to the Maldives, I was insulted, targeted, and ultimately removed from the plane without valid reason." She paused, her piercing gaze scanning the crowd. This was not just an act of discrimination. It's a symptom of a system that abuses its power, a system that believes it can act without consequence. Her words struck a chord, and the live-streamed press conference quickly garnered millions of views. The hashtag Justice for Kamala trended on social media, sparking widespread public outrage and drawing attention from political and media circles alike. In response, the airline released a hasty statement denying responsibility, claiming that Emily, the flight attendant, had acted independently. However, this only fueled public anger. Investigative journalists uncovered that Emily had acted on direct orders from an airline executive with political motives to target Kamala. Seizing the opportunity, Kamala and her legal team filed a lawsuit against the airline, alleging discrimination, harassment, and abuse of power. Sarah, along with other passengers, including the one who recorded the video, pledged to testify. "This isn't just about restoring my dignity," Kamala declared in an interview. "It's about ensuring no one else faces such injustice." That evening, as Kamala reviewed legal documents in her office, Kevin entered, his face alight with excitement. "Kamala, we just received a major tip," he said, handing her a folder. "Another flight attendant from that flight has come forward. She claims Emily was acting on direct orders from higher-ups." Kamala flipped through the folder, her expression growing steely. "Which higher-up?" "It was an airline executive," Kevin explained. "According to her statement, he has political connections and didn't want you on that flight." Kamala set the folder down, her resolve unwavering. "So this isn't just discrimination, it's a conspiracy. And we're going to expose it." Looking out her office window at the city lights, Kamala felt the weight of the battle ahead. This fight wasn't just about her, it was about justice. "They think they can bury the truth," she thought, her determination solidifying. "But I'll make sure the world sees it." The story of Kamala Harris's ordeal quickly became a national focus. Every detail of the incident, from Emily's hostility to the humiliating way Kamala was forced off the plane, went viral. Support poured in from human rights activists, political allies, and ordinary citizens who rallied behind her cause. The hashtag Justice for Kamala evolved into a symbol of resistance against systemic injustice and abuse of power. Kamala wasn't merely fighting a personal battle, this was an opportunity to stand up for justice and demand systemic change. Her legal team worked tirelessly, compiling every piece of evidence to confront one of the world's largest airlines. On a drizzly morning, Kamala stepped out of a sleek black car, her expression calm yet resolute. Outside the courthouse, a crowd erupted into cheers as she appeared. Many held signs with messages like "Justice for Kamala" and "End Discrimination." Cameras flashed incessantly, capturing her every step as she walked inside. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Emily, the flight attendant, sat on the defendant's side, her unease evident. Beside her was the airline's legal team, a group of seasoned professionals, their faces betraying the pressure of public scrutiny. On Kamala's side, her legal team was impeccably prepared, with every document and piece of evidence meticulously organized. The trial began with Kamala's attorney, a renowned human rights lawyer, taking the floor. Her voice was steady yet commanding as she addressed the court. "Your Honor, we are here today not just to restore the dignity of my client, Mrs. Kamala Harris, but to condemn behavior that is utterly unacceptable in our society. Mrs. Harris, a woman who has dedicated her life to justice, was publicly humiliated on a flight. This incident not only disrespected her personally, but also sent a harmful message about how we treat one another." The first piece of evidence was presented, a video recorded by a passenger. The courtroom fell silent as the video played, clearly showing Emily using discriminatory language and forcing Kamala off the plane. Emily's voice echoed unmistakably, "You don't belong here." The airline's legal team tried to argue that Emily had acted in the interest of safety, but their defense quickly unraveled as witnesses began to testify. Sarah, the lawyer who had been seated next to Kamala, was the first to take the stand. She recounted every detail of Emily's behavior, from her initial condescension to the public humiliation of Kamala. "She had no valid reason to remove Mrs. Harris from the plane," Sarah said, her voice resolute. "It was blatant discrimination. This wasn't just about Kamala Harris, it's indicative of how vulnerable individuals are often treated. Another passenger who had recorded the video also testified. "I was seated nearby and saw no reason to believe Mrs. Harris posed any kind of threat," he said. The flight attendant acted without justification. The most damning testimony came from an unexpected witness, another flight attendant on the same flight. Initially hesitant to speak out, she ultimately decided to testify after the incident gained national attention. "I overheard an executive give instructions through the internal communication system," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "He told us to handle Mrs. Harris. Emily was following orders. I didn't agree with it, but I didn't know what else to do." The courtroom buzzed with shock. This testimony reframed the case, revealing an orchestrated plan rather than an isolated incident. Kamala's legal team then presented internal emails from the airline, which showed executives discussing Kamala before the flight. The emails contained language suggesting she was unwelcome and should be removed at any cost. In her closing argument, Kamala's attorney delivered a powerful statement. "This case is not just about my client's dignity. It is about sending a clear message: no one has the right to abuse their position of power to harm others. Injustice, whether large or small, must be confronted." After days of testimony, the jury took only a few hours to reach a verdict. They found both Emily and the airline guilty of discrimination, harassment, and abuse of power. The airline was ordered to pay a substantial fine and implement comprehensive reforms in employee training. Emily was terminated immediately, and the executives involved faced further investigation. As Kamala exited the courthouse, she was met by a throng of supporters. Cheers erupted, and signs reading "Justice has prevailed" were held high. Stepping onto a podium, Kamala addressed the crowd, her voice clear and determined. "Today, justice has been served," she began. "But our work doesn't stop here. This is a wake-up call to confront injustice wherever it exists." The crowd roared in support, creating a moment that would resonate far beyond the courthouse steps. Kamala's story became more than just a personal victory, it was an inspiration to millions around the world. Back in her office that evening, Kamala gazed out at the glittering city lights. She knew this battle marked a turning point, not only for her career but for everyone fighting for justice. Yet she also understood that the journey was far from over. "They thought I would back down," she thought, her resolve unwavering. But this is only the beginning. Kamala Harris's story transcended the courtroom, evolving into a symbol of the broader fight against injustice and discrimination. News outlets, articles, and television programs continually covered the case's developments, while waves of support for Kamala spread across the globe. Yet, Kamala recognized that her victory was only the beginning. She wasn't content with merely defending her own dignity, she wanted to spark lasting change. Immediately after the trial, Kamala convened her team for a meeting in a large conference room. Standing before a whiteboard, surrounded by Kevin, her legal team, and longtime advisors, she addressed the group with determination. "This victory is an important step forward," she began, her gaze resolute as it swept across the room. "But if we stop here, it will remain just a single story. We need to seize this moment to drive change, not only in aviation but across every sector of society." Kevin nodded in agreement. "I've reviewed some policy proposals. We could collaborate with lawmakers to push for stronger anti-discrimination laws in the service industry, particularly in aviation. Establishing transparent reporting processes and passenger protections could be a solid first step." Kamala added, "We also need to educate people about their rights. Too many individuals face unfair treatment but don't know how to stand up for themselves. This is an opportunity to shift perceptions and empower others." Another advisor, Linda, suggested we could create an online platform where people can share their stories and seek legal support. Kamala nodded. "Fantastic. Let's make it happen." Her story continued to resonate far and wide. A week after the trial, Kamala appeared on a popular live television program where viewers eagerly awaited her reflections on the landmark case. The host, a seasoned journalist, began, "Ms. Harris, your story has inspired millions. What are your thoughts following your courtroom victory?" Sitting upright, Kamala's gaze was calm yet piercing. "This victory isn't just mine," she said. "It belongs to everyone who has faced discrimination but lacked a voice. It proves that when we stand up and fight, justice can prevail." The host leaned forward. "What do you think is the biggest lesson from this case?" Kamala smiled faintly, her voice steady yet firm. "The greatest lesson is this: no one has the right to make you feel unworthy. No matter who you are or where you come from, you have value and deserve to be treated with fairness." After the interview, thousands of messages, emails, and handwritten letters poured into Kamala's office. Each carried a personal story. One young woman wrote, "I was refused service at a restaurant because of my skin color. I didn't have the courage to speak up, but your story has given me the strength to fight for myself." An elderly man shared, "I stayed silent for years, thinking the injustices I experienced didn't matter. You've reminded me that every voice has the power to bring change." Kamala read each letter, deeply moved by the shared pain, resilience, and hope they conveyed. These stories only strengthened her resolve to continue the fight and lay the groundwork for systemic reform. Determined to make a difference, Kamala founded a nonprofit organization called Justice for All. The organization's mission was to protect the rights of those facing discrimination, educate the public, advocate for equitable policies, and provide legal support to victims of injustice. At the launch event, Kamala addressed a packed auditorium. "Justice for All is more than an organization, it's a promise," she declared, her voice resonating with conviction. "A promise that we will not turn our backs on the vulnerable. We will stand up, fight, and create a society where everyone is treated with respect and dignity." Her speech was met with thunderous applause and cheers, many attendees moved to tears by her sincerity and determination. Meanwhile, the airline at the center of the lawsuit faced mounting pressure. Following the court ruling, they issued a public apology to Kamala and committed to comprehensive reforms. Several executives were dismissed, and new anti-discrimination training programs were implemented. Other airlines, wary of similar scrutiny, began revising their policies to avoid becoming the next targets. One evening, as Kamala worked late in her office, she received a video call from Asha, the young girl from the village where she had been stranded. Asha's eyes shone brightly as she spoke. "Miss Kamala, I wanted to thank you," Asha said. "Because of you, I've decided what I want to do. I want to become a lawyer, just like you and Sarah. I want to help people who are treated unfairly." Kamala's smile radiated pride. "You can do it, Asha. I believe in you. And when you're ready, I'll be here to support you." Later that night, as Kamala sipped tea in her office, she allowed herself a rare moment of peace. The city lights twinkled outside her window, a reminder of the world she was working to change. Her fight had grown far beyond a personal battle. It had become a movement, a rallying cry for justice. "They thought I'd back down," Kamala reflected, her resolve unwavering. "But this is just the beginning." Kamala Harris's journey had transformed from a personal triumph into a beacon of hope for millions. As she reflected on the victory, her gaze fixed on the horizon, she thought, "They expected me to falter, but they didn't realize this is just the beginning of a fairer future." Following the resounding courtroom win, Kamala realized her story had transcended a single lawsuit. It had become a symbol of the global fight against injustice and discrimination. Yet for Kamala, this was not the end, but the start of a greater mission, building a more equitable and inclusive society. In the weeks after the trial, Kamala and her team focused on expanding justice for all. The organization attracted not only financial support from donors and businesses, but also thousands of volunteers across the nation. One morning, Kevin, Kamala's trusted assistant, entered her office with a thick folder in hand. "Kamala, we've received over 2,000 requests for assistance in the past 2 weeks," he said, his tone a mix of excitement and concern. "These are from people facing workplace discrimination, denial of services due to their race, and abuse of authority in service industries. Your story has given people hope. Kamala opened the folder and flipped through its pages, each filled with heartbreaking yet determined stories. A woman shared how she was fired for being pregnant. A young man recounted being denied a job because he was transgender. Each story revealed the ongoing challenges faced by many. "We need to act immediately," Kamala said, her voice resolute. "We can't let them feel alone or powerless for another second." Kevin assembled the legal team and prioritized the most urgent cases. Kevin nodded and left, folder in hand. Kamala stood by the window, gazing at the distant sky. "We can't change everything overnight," she thought, "but every step forward makes a difference." To amplify their message and reach more people, Kamala began organizing forums in major cities across the country. At these events, she shared her story and listened to the voices of the community. One of the largest gatherings took place in Chicago, where thousands assembled. As Kamala stepped onto the stage, the lights from cameras and countless eyes focused on her. Taking a deep breath, she began. "I stand here today not just for myself, but for everyone who has been treated unfairly. For everyone whose voice has been dismissed. But remember this, we are not alone. Together, we can fight, and together, we can change the world." She paused, her gaze sweeping the audience. "This journey won't be easy, but it is worth it. Every step we take is a beacon of light in the darkness." The hall erupted into thunderous applause. In the crowd, a young woman turned to her friend, tears streaming down her face. "She's not just speaking for herself," she whispered. "She's speaking for all of us. Justice for all continued to grow." Volunteer lawyers from across the country joined the cause, providing free legal assistance for urgent cases. Major corporations pledged to improve their anti-discrimination policies and fund community education programs. Sarah, the lawyer who had defended Kamala on the flight, became one of the organization's key advisors. During a strategy meeting, Sarah proposed a new initiative. "We should launch human rights training programs in schools and workplaces," Sarah suggested. "Many people don't even realize they have rights. If we educate early, we can prevent misconduct before it happens." Kamala nodded. "That's an excellent idea. Let's implement pilot programs immediately, starting with the most vulnerable communities." On the political front, Kamala was invited to serve as an advisor for the Comprehensive Fairness Act. The proposed legislation aimed to combat discrimination in service industries, protect marginalized groups, and impose strict penalties for abuses of authority. In a meeting with legislators, Kamala spoke with conviction. "We need a system that doesn't just protect but actively promotes equality. No one should live in fear because they are different. Let's make this bill a true tool for change." One day, Kamala received an email from a young woman in India. The email read, "Dear Ms. Kamala, your story changed my life. I used to believe I wasn't strong enough to speak up after being denied a job just because I'm a woman. But when I read about you, I decided not to stay silent. Now, I'm working in the job I was once denied. Thank you for giving me hope." As Kamala read the email, her heart swelled with emotion. Stories like these reminded her that while the journey was difficult, every step brought hope and change. At an event honoring inspirational women, Kamala was presented with the Justice Trailblazer Award. Stepping onto the stage to accept the honor, she addressed the audience. "This award isn't just for me. It's for everyone who has stood up and found their voice despite fear. I promise to keep fighting, not just for myself, but for all of us." The audience gave her a standing ovation, the moment one of solidarity and inspiration. Late one evening, Kamala stood on the balcony of her office, gazing out at the city lights sparkling in the night. She sipped her tea, savoring a rare moment of peace. The successes she had achieved so far were just the beginning. "They thought I would back down," she reflected, her resolve unshaken. "But this is only the start of something greater." The flame of justice burned brightly within Kamala Harris, fueling her resolve. "We've come so far," she thought, "but the road ahead is even longer. I'm ready to keep walking." Time passed, and Kamala's influence, along with the impact of justice for all, extended far beyond the United States. Her story became a source of inspiration for justice movements worldwide, translated into multiple languages, and featured in international newspapers, major conferences, and online forums. Yet Kamala saw this recognition not just as an honor, but as a profound responsibility. One morning, during a team meeting at her Washington office, Kevin entered with a letter in hand, his excitement unmistakable. "Kamala," he began, "we've just received an invitation from the United Nations. They want you to speak at this year's Global Human Rights Summit." The room fell silent for a moment before erupting in cheers. Kamala closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the gravity of the moment. "This is a major opportunity," she said, her voice steady. "We're not just representing those who have faced injustice. We must drive change on a global scale." Kevin nodded, determination shining in his eyes. "I'll make sure everything is prepared. You'll have the strongest voice at this event." A month later, Kamala stood on the stage at the Global Human Rights Summit in Geneva. The vast auditorium was filled with leaders, activists, scholars, and representatives from hundreds of nations. As the spotlight illuminated her face, she began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice both powerful and heartfelt, "my story is not unique. I am one of millions who have faced injustice, but I was fortunate to have the chance to fight and reclaim justice. Today, I am not here to tell my story, I am here to speak for those who cannot." She continued, "Injustice knows no borders. Discrimination, abuse of power, and emotional violence exist everywhere. Our mission is not only to heal, but to prevent. And to do that, we must act now." Her speech was met with a standing ovation. Afterward, leaders approached her with proposals for collaborations on global initiatives to advance human rights. But Kamala didn't stop at speeches. She partnered with international organizations, joined advisory councils, and launched projects in multiple countries. One of her largest initiatives was the Global Justice Network, a platform connecting human rights organizations worldwide to share resources, strategies, and experiences. During a meeting in Nairobi, Kamala reunited with Asha, the young girl she had once met in a remote village. Now an accomplished lawyer working for a non-governmental organization in Kenya, Asha's eyes sparkled with pride as she spoke. "Miss Kamala," Asha said, "because of you, I found my voice. I want to thank you for inspiring me and so many others." Kamala placed a hand on Asha's shoulder, her expression warm. "No, Asha. You're the one who stood up and fought. You're proof that we can change the world if we dare to dream and take action." Back in the United States, Kamala and her team continued to expand justice for all. They established community centers across multiple states, offering free legal counseling and hosting human rights workshops. Their most significant milestone came with the passage of the Comprehensive Justice Act by Congress. This landmark legislation aimed to protect citizens from discrimination in services and workplaces. At the White House signing ceremony, Kamala stood beside the president, pride swelling in her chest as she witnessed the fruits of relentless effort. "This is not just a victory for those who have faced injustice," she said in her speech. "It is a declaration that we, as a society, will not tolerate inequality in any form." Shortly afterward, Kamala published a book titled Light in the Darkness, recounting her journey and sharing lessons learned from others' stories. The book became a global phenomenon, serving not just as her personal narrative, but as a call to action for anyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. One late evening, as Kamala sat in her office, she sifted through documents for new projects, emails from international colleagues, and a handwritten letter from a 10-year-old girl in Brazil. The letter read, "Dear Miss Kamala, I want to be like you. I want to help people feel respected and loved." Kamala held the letter close, her heart swelling with warmth and responsibility. She knew her journey was far from over. There was still so much to do, and she was ready to keep fighting. Stepping onto her balcony, the night wind brushed through her hair as she gazed up at the star-filled sky. The city below hummed with quiet energy, a reflection of the light she felt within. This isn't just my story, she thought. This is our story. And I won't stop until justice reaches everyone, everywhere. Kamala Harris's journey reminds us that monumental change often begins with small actions, daring to speak up and taking the first step, even when the road ahead seems daunting. Justice doesn't happen naturally, it is the result of perseverance, courage, and the power of unity. Each of us has the ability to make a difference, no matter how small. If this story inspires you, share it as a positive message within your community. Together, we can turn small steps today into a brighter future for all.